Hey, don't forget, live programming for you Christmas Eve and Christmas Day night. So get ready for all that. After you're done doing whatever you're doing, sit back and enjoy the program. Because let me tell you, our producers have put together some great stuff. I'm looking forward to it. Hey, Linda, give us a real quick review before we get into the second part of the story.
Right. My last question to Mr. Jones before the break was, do you have any intuitive gut feeling about what the non-humans are going to do next on Earth? And now Mr. Jones is going to share some of his thoughts since his 1977 close encounter with what he thinks were lizard skin entities, and they were inside of a small craft in his backyard. Now, again, Mr. Jones.
The gut intuitive feeling I got about my initial experience in 1977 was that they weren't necessarily extraterrestrial, as extra-dimensional.
Meaning that you felt they were more other-dimensional than extraterrestrial from a solar system somewhere.
Right, and I'm assuming this from what they were sitting in, because it didn't look like it was capable of traveling beyond the Earth or anywhere else. It looked like it was something that could travel maybe interdimensionally, but not in space. And it seems like they're exercising a little more power over us than we should be giving them.
Even in your case, when you were ready to basically take them on, but they sent you flying down the driveway and back into your bed.
Right.
And that means that they have some control over our physical and mental abilities.
Right, and that's the part that surprised me, because I never expected something like that to have that much control over me, because I always considered myself a very present person, very aware of my capabilities, of what I could do. For something that small to have that kind of grip, firm grip, and tight control over me in the blink of an eye really shocked me, and it caught me off guard. These thoughts were running through my head, and I started trying to analyze what I was going through as fast as I could. That's when I started thinking, do I have to let this happen? I'm not powerless. I've got to try and do something. That's when I started analyzing if I could break this gaze. Maybe I could gain some mobility back to do something.
And you did temporarily, but then they took over again.
Yeah, as soon as I broke eye contact with them and started walking backwards, that's when I was suddenly thrown through the wall and right down into the bed so hard that I remember being in midair bouncing out of it.
If they come from another dimension, why do you think that they would have such power over Homo sapien on this planet?
I don't know. From what I've heard about the subject, that they must have had some control over my nervous system. They must have had some way to manipulate electromagnetic energy that would manipulate my nervous system, because I was an electrician at one time, and what I was feeling when I was frozen was just as if I had my hand on a circuit that I couldn't let go of. And so I know there was something as far as energy or electrical about it that was affecting my nervous system. And I thought, okay, well, they have some sort of technology or understanding how to project a field to control me this way. But the simple matter that I'm still conscious, I'm still thinking, I must have some control to counteract this. And that's when I started gaining enough strength in my muscles in my right leg to start stepping backwards. And the reason I thought they're doing this with their eyes, they're doing this with their gaze, is because I saw, this is one thing I forgot to mention, the reason I started going down the driveway is I saw the corner of their, whatever it was they were in, sticking out from behind the house. And as I got closer and looked around and saw them inside, I wasn't paralyzed until I actually made eye contact. And that's what did it.
When you think about December 2012, does anything specific come into your mind?
Well, when everybody started talking about it, I started thinking back to that dream I had with the triangles in the sky. Because for some reason, I feel like the dream was around that time in the future. When I think back to that 1977 incident, there's going to be some sort of overlapping in 2012 that involves dimensions, where for a while we'll be able to peek through to something else, and maybe some people will disappear. And if they do, if anything happens, it's not a bad thing. It's just a choice that they made. They can step sideways or transit into this next reality or dimension, and the people who want to stay here can stay.
And that the triangles will be back, and that will signal to you that there might be this overlapping other dimensional issue at work?
Right. I think the triangles, I couldn't tell if they were Earth vessels, black projects, extraterrestrial, or what, but I felt like they had something to do with an imminent event that was happening. And the reason they suddenly appeared and didn't care if anybody had seen them is because they had to transport people.
Transport people into what you think is another dimension at that time because of some weakening or overlap or something that would allow transition to another dimension.
Yes, and that's just a feeling and speculation on my part.
Are we talking about the so-called rapture of revelations?
Well, I've thought about that too, and I've thought, well, that's a pretty good description. I don't mean direct intervention from God or something like that. I mean it's something involved with science. It's something under human or humanoid control.
And that the science part could be that there are natural cycles and fluctuations in this universe that allow every once in a while for dimensions to overlap.
Sure. And, the more I read and study about that, the more the bells start going off in my head. I start relating things that I've thought in the past. And having been a broadcast engineer, I do understand propagation of electromagnetics and some understanding of physics. And the more I read about it and the more I think about my experiences in the past, the more I realize the nuts and bolts of how these things can be done.
Meaning that there are frequencies, and this Earth, this matter universe could be in one frequency, and there could be many other Earths, matter worlds, in other frequencies, and they are kept apart from each other by frequency unless something happens in the natural physics of the cosmos that allows an overlapping of those frequencies.
Oh, sure. I understand that we live at a certain frequency, and frequencies have a certain phase, too. So you can even have a same frequency at a different phase, and the two are undetectable from each other, but they're separate worlds. So I do believe that if something happened, what I was trying to say earlier in 2012, I think something's going to happen as we start going through the galactic plane. I know it's feasible that we could be going into a different polarity of energy, which would affect our sun, which in turn would send that effect out to our planets, which in turn would affect the magnetosphere around our planet, which in turn could affect us individually, because we're also energy beings in a physical body. Since we're sensitive to our Earth's magnetosphere, that's how animals know when an earthquake's coming and that type of thing. Speculation on my part is there could be some sort of manipulation of energy as we go through that galactic plane, which will either require some of us to temporarily transit somewhere else for protection.
And the question that we all would like to know is, why have non-human intelligences been hanging around this planet for a very long time, and are they monitoring something and waiting for something specific to occur?
If we have been monitored by cousin races or somebody who may have bioengineered us or somebody who obviously has enough control over physics where it may even be possible for time travel, time as we know it isn't a big deal to them. They could be experiencing it differently. So, they could have been watching us for not only thousands, but millions of years. And obviously, they know the cycles of what our solar system goes through and our galaxy a lot better than we probably will for hundreds of years. So if they have a vested interest in watching us for so long, it seems to me they would have some sort of vested interest in our survival if something threatens that, and some sort of contingency plan to interact with us if necessary. So I think if something like that were going to happen, it would almost require them to be here and interact somehow as far as some sort of interaction with the phenomena itself or some sort of interaction with us as far as a safe house, a safe place, a safe area, a safe dimension, or just being here to tell us what we need to do to handle it. I can't imagine that a species like us on a planet like this, so heavily populated, cannot be known to a lot of intelligence out there, and that if something was threatening it, they would do nothing about it. Because it seems like if you were an intelligence out there and you knew of a planet like us, you just couldn't sit back and do nothing, even if you didn't care about us, just for the loss of what it took millions of years to build.
Right, that there would be a respect for the preciousness of life, and that Homo sapien and all of the biodiversity on this planet would have its own intrinsic value in this universe by any other intelligences simply because it was complex life.
Right, and even if we were lab rats to them, we're still an asset that took millions of years to build, and you got to protect that.
He's right.
I think so, and it reminded me very much of an extraordinary experience that I had back in 1990. It actually began after my very first book, An Alien Harvest, came out in the summer of 1989. And not long after it was out in the public, I started getting very typed, very educated letters from someone who did not identify themselves. There was no return address. But what they were saying in these typed letters seemed to be very technical. The man said that he had a pilot background, both in the Air Force and as an airline pilot, but that's all I knew. And then I was working at CNN in Atlanta, crossing over in 1990. And in May of 1990, I received a letter that said, I can be in Atlanta, knew where I was working. I can be there for 6 hours. I think it's very important that we have a chance to talk directly. And this person and I were able to sit down and talk for a period of time. He came. It was mostly a download, and then he left. And these were his opening words to me that I have never forgotten, and they fit so well with Mr. Jones' comments as well as so many other people in the human abduction syndrome I've interviewed. And he said, Linda, you need to realize that the UFO phenomena is not always strictly physical machines. Many glowing phenomena are tears in the electromagnetic membrane around this planet. And that's a direct quote. And he also said that the atomic bomb experimentation on this planet was tearing into a magnetic fabric in the cosmos that we did not understand, and that we were damaging other dimensions in the process of experimentation with atomic bombs, and that this was one of the big issues that he understood from his mysterious background as being a major issue with whatever this intelligence is and why it is so concerned about this planet. And for you and the Coast audience to keep his phrase in mind, many of the glowing phenomena are tears in the electromagnetic membrane around this planet. Well, Colonel Corso, before he died, we had quite a conversation in which he was referring to the same idea that there is, if you want to just call it a magnetic fabric or membrane, that he had seen documents in his work in which there were 7 or 9 locations on the planet that were identified as being erratic or weak or could collapse magnetic field points on the Earth that are natural, and that other dimensions, other intelligences take advantage of these erratic points in the magnetic field to come in and out from someplace else in another dimension, another timeline. It's not clear. None of us fully understand. But that our own planet has this anomaly in the fabric of its magnetic fields that can allow these entry points and exit points. And he put that list in the day after Roswell, and it does include places like Sedona, Arizona, for example, is on that list. And another part of this whole background that I've had from having the ability to talk to some people in military and intelligence, and this idea of some kind of reptilian intelligence and presence. When I did my second book, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 1, Facts and Eyewitnesses, I have a taxonomy section, which is all colored illustrations from people all over, literally, the United States, spanning, I think it was 20 or 25 years. None of these people know the other people, and I had collected these illustrations. Well, when you get to this one section of the taxonomy with dates going back into the 70s, for example, and this man's experience was 1977, the engineer, that you are looking at 2 or 3 or 4 pages in which what else could you say but that you are looking at standing up lizards and standing up crocodiles. And I think that most people want to shut down at that idea. And yet, George, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in one of the most famous pieces that was not translated until about 15 or so years ago, and this is the famous section in which the religious figure is on the ground cowering against who is standing in front of him, and one says, I am the Prince of Darkness. My name is Belial. And the religious figure on the ground looking up, as being described in the Dead Sea Scroll, says that he is looking at a viper. The word is V-I-P-E-R in the Aramaic translation. And wearing a cloak of many colors. This is Dead Sea Scroll language. And the other is described or is interpreted to be tall and perhaps blonde-haired, who says, I am the Prince of Light, and there are other names. But the two entities standing in front of the religious figure ask, who do you choose to lead you? Dead Sea Scrolls.
See, and if you interpret that, something happened then, too.
Well, doesn't it say that there is a context on this planet, including the Garden of Eden, in which something of, we'll call it a serpent or viper nature, has been woven in to the history of the humanoid mind on this planet for thousands of years? I think that's a fair statement. And what that relationship is to what the engineer encountered in his backyard, and so many other people in the human abduction syndrome have also encountered, that is one of the mysteries, but it seems like our own planet, if you want to call it written history, carved in stone on papyrus, has always had this other layer of something that would fall into the reptilian or viper category. And then you come to that famous document that I was shown at Kirtland that said extraterrestrial biological entities, which would sound to me from someplace at our solar system, manipulated DNA and already evolving primates to create Homo sapiens.
We'll be back with Linda's final report before we take phone calls in the following hour on Coast to Coast AM. Hey, don't forget our Friar prayer session sometime on Friday. Just take a few moments to say a little prayer for those people who need it, and you can't imagine how strong that is. When we come back in a moment, we'll have Linda's final report on Coast to Coast AM. Linda, any up-and-coming conferences for you?
Well, I think the next one is the Open Minds Conference down in Phoenix in Tempe. It's the last weekend in February, and so that's when the season will start. And then it seems like there will be one a month for I don't know how long. But if everybody will go to earthfiles.com, I always put notices up about upcoming conferences, and would like to say here, as I have on other Coast programs, that people listening to these stories of people like the engineer who have had an encounter that he's really never talked to anyone about before, and you would like to communicate with me on or off the record with or without your real name, you can email me at earthfiles@earthfiles.com. It's the same name as my website, and Earth Files refers to a reporter who files news about the Earth. And I welcome hearing from all of the Coast listeners who may have had their own experiences and have never talked, and are hearing now some people who have had extraordinary experiences in their own lives and have come forward and have said to me that until they heard me on Coast or saw Earth Files, they never thought they would tell a single soul.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay. Now tell us about this next one.
Well, I'm telling you that November program that I did with about Florida really provoked a lot of emails.
Mm-hmm,
Amazing, George, how many people have had some kind of an encounter, well, let's just say a sighting of something that would fit into this category of what we're calling, for lack of any other understanding, using Ann Hall's very good description, an aerial gyroscope with spinning colored lights. And one of the emails that I got after the November Coast and Earth Files report was from a man named John Thomas. This is his real name. He's given me permission to use his real name. He is a 46-year-old data administrator in South Burlington, Vermont. And in his first email, he wrote this: I saw something quite similar to this when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Tunisia in late August 1988. What made the event particularly weird was that at the moment when my wife and I saw this flying circle of multicolored pulsing lights next to our taxi, we were fearing for our lives because the driver was attempting to run a motorcyclist off the road, and we were going extremely fast down the very dark coastal road that had no lights. We were terrified and certain that the cycle rider was going to be killed and us in the process. I looked over at my wife and saw out her window this huge rotating cluster of multicolored lights traveling along at our speed, but the flying thing was over the seawater, which is right there along the road, the Mediterranean Sea. My mind, emotions went from fear over the driving event to wonder and astonishment at seeing this large thing flying very close next to us. It felt completely surreal. I am not sure how the flying lights went away. It was like we looked forward at the motorcycle and then back at the craft, and it was gone, close quote. Sadly, his wife died later in Tunisia, but both encountered together in August of 1988 this most beautiful, baffling, multicolored aerial object of spinning lights that neither had ever seen before in their lives. And I emailed back asking John if he could try using colored pencils or crayons to sketch what he remembered. On November 29th, he emailed an illustration with comments that I have right now at my news website, earthfiles.com, in this report entitled Aerial Gyroscope Encounters in Tunisia and Japan. Before the other amazing Japan encounter, here now is John Thomas about what happened in that taxi with his wife and fellow Peace Corps volunteer on that night ride from Sousse to Hurghada, Tunisia, in late August 1988.
The main ride to this village of Hurghada is along the coast. It runs along the Mediterranean Sea, and it's a two-lane road. It's a lot of sand. If you're headed north, on the right side of the car, the Mediterranean's going to be right there. The water's not too far from the road. So we get in this taxi, and a motorcyclist, a guy on a Vespa motorcycle, he pulls in front of our taxi, and the taxi driver gets mad, and they are yelling at each other. The taxi driver eventually tried to hit the motorcyclist. We were in the car realizing how dangerous it was getting, and that we really thought our taxi driver was going to hit the motorcycle. There's no street lights, so it's dark. They're going extremely fast, and we're really getting scared. And I'm looking out the front window. I see this big collection of circulating, rotating, multicolored lights. They were just there. And they would have been out over the water. It was just hovering there. There wasn't really even a sense of it moving other than moving with the taxi. It was shocking. We both were in awe, sort of like, what is it? You know, it was so strange, and it was such a strange thing to be suddenly switched and looking at that.
How far from the car was it, and how big do you think it was?
I think that it was out over the water, so that would have been 30 or 40 feet off of the beach over the water, and it was probably 50 feet up in the air, or if even that, so not that high. From the car, that was probably like half a football field.
So maybe 150 feet from where you are in the car on the road.
Yeah.
Was it right at your altitude?
It was exactly out my window. It was just like perfectly lined up out the window. The way the road is, it's elevated a little bit from the water.
Did it come into your head that whatever this object was, it must be moving at exactly the speed of the car to stay outside of the window?
Yeah, I think that was part of the shock when you see it, is that it's fixed with your motion. And it was pitch black out, but the lights were attached to something, and I'd never seen anything like it before, and it was not far away.
What diameter do you think it was?
I thought, is this possibly a big helicopter? My sense was, even though it didn't give off the sense in any way that it was a helicopter, other than it was hovering, but it was like one of those double ones. None of it made sense.
Could you go into details about the colors you're seeing, the size of the lights, and whether or not, like Ann Hall in the Isles of Capri, Florida, in her illustration, she described a central horizontal band of colored lights and then vertical bands of lights that were also spinning but were all white.
Yeah, there was a fixed vertical spinning band. There were definitely lights that spun, that looked like they spun up and around. So there was a real sense of it being a particular shape, and of these things turning, and the colors were a bunch of different colors, like greens and blues and reds and yellows and colors I've never seen on an airplane before. These colors are like just bizarre.
If you were describing a pattern that the lights were forming and what the object's general overall pattern was, what would that be?
Circular. There was definitely a circle. That center area was a circle. It looked like also a dome, sort of lights traced up. I guess going just by the shape of the lights, it would make a shape of sort of a dome. But those lights that were tracing up also seemed to cut under. That's what made me think of the gyroscope. When I saw the picture, I'm thinking, this is the closest thing. It immediately reminded me of this thing that I had seen and the whole experience. It happened very quickly, even though here's a strange part of it, and I don't know if I've just imagined this into it, but this has been my recollection of it since I've been back and have told the story. When I think back to that time in the taxi cab, it all seems to be in slow motion. Looking at this thing, to then looking back at the road, to the thing being gone, all of that seems like it's just this complete, slow, hazy recollection. And I don't know if it's because we were in shock of everything happening, because it was extremely stressful. But when I think back on it, and I've told other people, every time I get to that point, that's my only memory of it, is that it was in slow motion. It became more the story about we almost killed this guy in the motorcycle. Oh, and also we saw this really weird thing out the window.
Another man who saw a, quote, really weird, huge spinning gyroscope thing, close quote, wants to be called only Jack. It was the summer of 1998, some 250 miles northeast of Tokyo in the Tohoku region of Japan. Jack was a professional wrestler and had been hired to perform at several Japanese locations. So he and the company he worked for traveled from wrestling site to wrestling site in a tour bus. Jack's encounter with a craft of unknown origin began near Sendai City on the northeastern coast. Jack was sitting up front with the tour bus driver because he wanted to see a UFO. His boss and others had told him that lots of people in that northeastern part of Japan saw what they called star people. To Jack's shock and amazement, what came down right in front of the bus was a large, spinning, glowing object that reminded Jack of a gyroscope. 12 years later, on November 24th, 2010, Jack heard my coast-to-coast AM radio interview with Ann Hall in the Isles of Capri, Florida, and saw her illustration at my news website, earthfiles.com, of another spinning gyroscope. Jack could not believe it. He said he has never talked with anyone outside of his Japanese employer and close family about the amazing spinning lights of a craft he is convinced was from beyond Earth. Here now is Jack, the retired wrestler, to describe what came down right in front of the tour bus in the summer of 1998 in northeastern Japan.
A large, shining object like I have never seen before in any time in my life and never seen again, flew down in front of us at a very high rate of speed and very, very close to the bus, to the window. It shot out in front of us, I would say approximately 30 feet, traveling at the same speed that the bus is traveling, 55 to 60 miles an hour, down a dark highway in the middle of the night. This object, aerial gyroscope, whatever it was, flew down in front of the bus and adjusted its own speed to be now traveling at the same speed that we are, so that it's keeping in front of it as if it's on purpose, allowing me and the driver to witness it. The driver starts freaking out, and he is making a lot of noise, and I'm stunned. It's changing colors so quickly and so fast and changing shape that I can see that it is a diamond-shaped, metal-looking object that is transparent. You can see inside a big, round, spherical ball that is also metal and transparent and appears to be spinning very fast. It is entirely covered in lights to the point that it looks like Christmas ornament sort of lights in a way, but they're changing so fast and in such a rhythmic pattern, I don't know how to describe it. It's nothing like I've ever seen before. The entire thing is covered in rapidly changing, bright, beautiful lights. Colors so vivid, it's hard to describe. At one point it was an orangish yellow, and then a reddish, and then a bluish, and then a greenish, and every color you can think of and imagine. This thing could change its color. It's such a rapid, rhythmic pattern.
When you saw Ann Hall's illustration from the Isles of Capri in Florida from May 2010, you thought that it resembled what you had seen in Japan in 1998?
Yes, and that is the reason why I have come forward to try to give my report to you, because her description and her drawing, I'm thinking, this has got to be very, very similar, if not the exact same type of thing. So that inspired me to try to contact you.
And Jack, what happened as you are mesmerized watching this object that's about 30 feet out in front of the bus and staying at that distance?
My first thing is I better calm down this driver because he's losing his mind over here, and I don't want to run off the road and get killed. So as I'm kind of grabbing him to kind of calm him down, this object, aerial gyroscope, drops down about 3 or 4 feet and suddenly rapidly accelerates, shooting straight up in front of us and up into the sky, and it makes a sharp turn to the right, vanishes up into the sky above a mountain. Okay? At this moment, my boss peeks his head up there to see what's going on and just sees the tail end of it shooting out there up into the sky and vanishing. And he looks at me and says, okay, so now you have seen one.
And George, that sentence from his boss Okay, now you have seen one, leads to one of the most fascinating parts of Jack's story. It was a few weeks before this incredible encounter in the bus that his boss has him go to a dinner in Tokyo. They were on a break in this wrestling tour. And the host of this dinner owns this building, owns a lot of buildings in Tokyo, is extremely wealthy, and they're having this dinner party up on something like the 22nd floor. And the host comes over to Jack and says he'd like, as a host, to show Jack some of his office, and they get to where his desk is, and there are photographs in there, and he's showing Jack various things, and right over or behind the main desk chair on the wall was this extraordinary, as Jack said to me, he said, here's this photograph, and you can see that it is a very colorful diamond-shaped aerial object and is more of a pinkish-orange color. And the owner of this building and all of this real estate tells Jack that this is a photograph that was taken by one of his security cameras in another skyscraper across the street, and that it is an actual photograph of this object that the owner of the building says this is related to what people in Sendai City and Tohoku call the star people. This is all happening weeks before the event in the tour bus. And Jack said that as he was getting this orientation, he was also told that some Japanese residents have reported seeing these diamond-shaped spinning objects up in the mountainous regions far away from the cities, and that they have seen them come down to the ground. And some say that they watch as this big lighted spinning thing seems to, this is a Japanese interpretation, extract nourishment from the ground, and that Jack was shown a report by this businessman where in the remote mountains in Japan, where they have seen these spinning things land, that there are bare spots in that forest. Well, remember, in November, Ann Hall and other witnesses talked about seeing the lights that have been happening down in the Isles of Capri and Marco Island and Naples, where the lights have come down into the mangroves, and then the fishermen have found that there are circular areas where nothing grows in the mangroves in the Naples to Marcos Island area. And this is the first time that I have ever encountered these descriptions with vividness and illustrations of whatever this spinning aerial gyroscope is. But it underscores for me, George, that when we can provide reports with illustrations and multiple eyewitnesses, there are so many people out there in the world who have been biting their tongue, and it would help us all if people listening to this report tonight, if you have seen anything that resembles these stories, get in touch with me at earthfiles@earthfiles.com, and it leaves us, George, with that haunting question. What in the world are these spinning aerial gyroscopes related to water all over the world?
When we come back, conversations with Linda, an hour of your phone calls and stories next.